Hi everyone, this is Lana Smith with the Leslie Science and Nature Center and the Ann Arbor Hands-On Museum. We're seeing so many folks this summer trying new different activities, and it's great to see. One of the most popular outdoor activities to do in the summer is bird watching. And for today, we're going to share with you some tools, tips, and tricks of what we use whenever we go out bird watching. There's a lot of great and different bird species you can find, whether it's a local park, in your neighborhood, or even along a wooded trail. You might also gain some new knowledge about birds and how they survive along the way. First, let's start with the basics. It's important to know a little bit more about birds before we go out looking and understanding them out in the wild. Birds, like other animal groups, are classified or identified because of certain physical features or behaviors that they possess out in the wild. For example, birds are warm-blooded, just like us humans. They maintain a certain body temperature throughout the whole day. All birds also have feathers, and all birds have wings. And finally, many birds have the ability to fly thanks to those two features. That, among other physical features and behaviors that birds possess, helps us classify them from other animals. But obviously, different kinds or species of birds also have their own unique features and behaviors to help us tell them apart. A scientist who studies birds is called an ornithologist, and they need to make sure they know all these different features and behaviors, things that they observe with different kinds of birds out in the wild to better understand and identify them. Oftentimes, an ornithologist can't learn everything about every single bird on the planet, so then they share information with each other to make sure they get a general overarching view of the world of birds. Another way to learn more about birds is by meeting one up close. Let's meet one of our residential birds at the Leslie Science and Nature Center and see if we can better find those features that help us classify this animal as a bird versus other animal groups. The bird we'll meet today is what we call a raptor, or a bird of prey. I can tell because there's a couple key characteristics that bird group has that others don't. It includes their talons, these 4 sharp toenails they use to grab onto their food, as well as a large, sharp, curved beak. The kind of bird that I have on my glove is what we call a barred owl, B-A-R-R-E-D. He's known for the stripes or bars that run down his belly. Now, before we get into the details of why he's an owl, let's confirm the basics of why we know he's a bird. First, as stated before, this animal is covered in feathers of different colors, shapes, and sizes. He also has his wings tucked behind him. Owls are very silent, sneaky flyers, and they also have these large, broad wings to help them float through the air as they slowly grab their prey. Even if they fly at a different time of the day than other raptors like hawks or falcons, they still possess those key adaptations to be a predator. Owls also possess many different kinds of feathers, one to keep them warm or to be able to fly appropriately, but also to help them camouflage. He kind of looks like a tree. That's because we often find this animal in a wooded or forest habitat. Beyond their feathers and their wings, all birds also have a beak. We already mentioned that raptors have a sharp, curved beak, and many birds have different shaped and sized beaks based on what they eat. You could have a duck that uses its beak to filter plant material out of the water, or many songbirds that have their beaks like nutcrackers in order to pick apart seeds or maybe even insects. So when you're looking at birds and you see their beak, take note of the size and shape. You might be able to discover what they eat. Then beyond that, you can look at other specific features to tell different birds apart from each other. Owls tend to have really large eyes, and they're always in front of their face, something we call binocular vision. That's what they use to be able to see better in the dark. Many owls also have a very round, circular face. It actually helps them hear better and make sure that they can sit inside the holes of trees, or cavities as we call them, to be able to camouflage and rest on their nest. But feathers, wings, beak, being warm-blooded are really the key things we use to identify this animal as a bird. If you find a nest of a bird, there's one other thing you can look for too: eggs. All birds lay eggs with a really hard shell as an outer coating. That way, birds are able to nest or at least build somewhere for them to reside in different areas and habitats around the world. Very different from other animals like a reptile or an amphibian that will always lay their eggs on the ground or have to lay them in the water. See if you can look for those bird basics or features to first help you identify birds from other animal groups. When starting a bird watching hobby, or maybe as a one-time thing, there are some good tools that you can use to really help you identify or go looking for birds. Remember, birds are live animals. They're constantly moving, and sometimes it's hard to tell what you're looking at without getting an up-close or detailed look at certain species. So one of the biggest tools to bring are binoculars. Binoculars are great since there's usually many songbirds, small birds that particularly eat seeds that we find in our neighborhoods, and they're constantly moving around. And they usually don't get too close, at least not to animals like us. So by having binoculars, you're able to take them, look through your lens, and zoom in on different features. You can also practice using binoculars on something that's still, like a tree or a fence post, or any object outside that isn't moving. And try to learn more about how to zoom in and out or get focus using your binoculars. That way, when you think you found a bird, you already know how to use your main tool. Another good tool to have are field guides. You can get a couple different kinds. If you really want to get in depth and learn as much as you can about the different bird species, or better yet, how to categorize them, I recommend Peterson's Field Guides to Birds. This field guide puts them birds into different categories, if you will, or the main groups of the other bird species that they're related to. Now, this one contains birds that are both for Eastern and Central North America, so not all of the species in this book we might find in Michigan. It also tells you their geographic range, or the areas where they find them. Also, if they migrate, how big their nest is, clutch size, and many other details. It also categorizes them by family, so if you do want to look and see what birds are related to others, it's easy to be able to do so through here. If you're going to use this kind of field guide though, I recommend practicing with it first. Sometimes it's hard to find all of the birds you're looking for because you'll have to flip through many pages. Or maybe you want to learn a little bit more about the birds you think you'll see before you go out and find them. So I always recommend practicing with your tools before implementing them on your bird watching journey. You can also just use a small pocket field guide if you just want a quick look based on pictures or what you think you see of the birds out in the wild. Many of these pocket or small field guides contain pictures and show you the difference between the males and females in their colors, and therefore gives you a really quick, easy flip through of common birds you can find, whether it's in your state or in other areas around the world. Another cool tool to use though that I love is a bird caller. Now, it's important not to use this too much because you don't want to confuse the birds into thinking, well, you're a bird. But you can use this to try to call back and remember or match a song you think you hear. For example, I have what's called an identifier, and it comes with different cards of different birds I might find in my region. I can stick this in, play the song of a bird that I'm curious about, let's pick a northern cardinal, and see what I think it sounds like. Now I can take that and see if I hear that same call around me. I can also use this to practice at home, trying to memorize different bird songs, or better yet, just use my curiosity to determine what these birds that I think I've seen before sound like. Once you've chosen the area where you want to start bird watching, now we have to figure out what's the easiest or effective way to identify some of the birds we see and hear. Usually when we start bird watching, we work with what's called the 3 S's. That's size, shape, and song. Oftentimes when you're bird watching, it's hard to actually find the bird you're looking for, mostly because they're constantly moving or they're really well camouflaged. But by using things like the size of certain birds we know, its shape, or by hearing or listening for different bird calls around you, it makes it a little easier to identify or understand the species of birds you'll see in your area. Let's start with size first. When you look inside your field guide, you'll see that the different images of birds will note that some are smaller or larger. Sometimes they'll show you their wingspan, other times they'll tell you just how tall they are from their feet to the top of their head. And right away you'll notice there's a lot of differences in size based not only on the kind of birds there are, but also based on maybe where they live or what they eat. Take a look at the two images here. While we can't see the colors of these birds, you can see that one is obviously larger than the other. When you're using your binoculars or think you see a bird from afar, you can try to judge what kind of bird it is just by its size. For example, the two shapes that I have on here is of an American crow and a black-capped chickadee. Now, sure, these two birds are not related to each other. Crows are corvids, whereas chickadees are songbirds. But right away, these are two common species you're bound to find in your area. And you can tell that their sizes are very different. That way, if you can't see their color, or can only see their shadow up in the tops of the trees, you have a better idea of what kind of bird it could be by judging its size in relation to other birds. Pretty simple. Let's start with shape next. Shape is a little different than size in that some birds might be the same size. They might have the same wingspan, they might be just as tall, but perhaps their beak is shaped differently. Their tail isn't as long, or they have really broad wingspans in order to help them soar. Remember the raptor that we showed you at the beginning? Well, raptors themselves have very different shapes, or what we call silhouettes, that help us better tell what kind of raptor it could be, especially in flight. Sometimes, even when using your binoculars, you can't tell what kind of bird it is by its color or its size. But by looking at the wing and the tail shape, you get a better idea of the bird you're seeing through your lens. Take a look at the two images here. One is of a hawk, and the other is of a vulture. Two common raptors you'll find soaring above during the day, riding these really hot air currents. Now, hawks and vultures do hunt for different food, and they fly a little differently than each other, but sometimes they can be very similar in size. However, if you look at the shape of the two images, hawks have these really rounded, almost U-shaped wings with these very broad, wide flight feathers near the bottom and the side. You'll also notice on the edges of their wings, it looks like those edge feathers are clumped together. However, with a vulture, you'll notice that many of their feathers, particularly on the edge or end of their wings, are spread out, looking like fingertips. Also, vultures teeter-totter as they fly, and they almost create a V shape with their wings, V standing for vulture. Therefore, when you look up into the sky and see just the silhouette, you'll notice right away, thanks to the two different shapes, and not only just the size, that you have yourself a hawk or a vulture. That can apply to a lot of different kinds of birds, but usually shape and size work best when you think you see a bird, but aren't quite sure what it is if you can't see its color. But what if the bird is constantly moving? What if you can't see the bird at all? Well, luckily, you can still use their call. I think I have the most fun by using the third S, song. It's a unique challenge in trying to determine what birds are around you just by listening for the songs you hear, rather than being able to see them. Oftentimes songbirds are really small, or birds are just really fast, and we can't even keep track of where they go or what they look like. But many birds have a unique call, or bird song, that many ornithologists or bird enthusiasts use to better identify the common birds around them. Now, remember this tool, the identifier? This actually plays bird calls of common bird species I find in my area. It also plays something called a mnemonic, or a way that we can put human words to describe what we think the bird songs sound like. For example, let's go back to that black-capped chickadee. We already used it to reference size. When I play a black-capped chickadee call, I usually think that they sound like they're saying their name over and over again. Chickadee-dee-dee-dee-dee. Here, let me tell what you think. Kind of sounds like chickadee, right? Well, I can also use this to play the mnemonic, or what we humans could describe the bird song as sounding like.
Black-capped chickadee, chickadee-dee-dee-dee.
Sounds more like it now, doesn't it? Now, if you can't access an identifier, you can also use an app on your smartphone or any smart device. Many times they'll also have bird calls of common bird species around you. Another one I can play is one of a northern cardinal. The males are usually a really bright red color and often have a tip on the tops of their heads. They often sound like they're saying the words cheer, 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 purdy, 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 also over and over again. Here, tell me what you think. One more time. Now the mnemonic. Let's see if it matches.
Northern cardinal. Cheer, cheer, cheer. Purdy, purdy, purdy.
Super cool. Now, I'm starting to hear other birds calling around me, which is really cool. I can still try to practice, but I don't want to play my caller too much. That's because I don't want to confuse the birds around me into thinking, well, I'm a bird. Sometimes smaller birds may be intimidated by other larger bird species in their habitat, and if they hear their call, they may fly away or get nervous. So I make sure that if I'm outside or in an area where there are lots of birds, that I only play these calls a couple times. That's why it's always good to practice indoors or in a quiet space to learn how to use this tool or even try to memorize these bird calls before putting it into practice and listening for them outdoors. Once you've worked or practiced using the 3 S's in one area, now try your hand at moving throughout different local parks, neighborhoods, or even along a wooded trail, and use these tools to try to identify different birds around you. Maybe you can find a bird feeder and observe birds right in front of you, or go out to a pond or lake to look for waterfowl or birds migrating along the shore. The possibilities are endless. Your tools can also be used to look for other things like evidence of birds. For example, since birds are constantly moving, sometimes you can just look for their nests. It's as easy as finding a spot to sit in, taking your binoculars, looking up into the trees, and seeing if you can see a variety of different sticks, soft objects, or perhaps leaves that are all come together to form a nest. If you think you found one that's really large, it may be a nest from a squirrel, or what's called a dray. But birds build their nest not only in certain trees, but sometimes at certain heights. You may find a cardinal nest a little lower to the ground versus that of a finch, or maybe even a nest big enough for a raptor. Who knows? Now that we've gone over different tools, tips, and tricks that we use when we bird watching, it's your turn. Go ahead and see if you can start your own bird watching adventure and look for what species you can find even right outside your window. We have so many songbirds, raptors, waterfowl, and more to discover here in Michigan, but you can also look for evidence of birds or even other animals while you explore. There's so many discoveries to find, even just by taking a walk outside. We also thank you for joining us for today's video and look forward to hearing about the discoveries you have. Make sure that you keep exploring and enjoy your time out in the natural world.